All right, folks. Hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. We're going to turn 17 years old next month. I'm targeting it at February 6th because that's my birthday. Because I'll turn
Oh,
50.
yay.
Thank you. I'll turn 57. And DM Radio turns 17 years old, folks. We launched in February of 2008. So 25 minus 8, still 17, 17 years old. Lots of conversations, lots of things have changed. And today we're going to have a very intimate conversation with Danielle LeBlanc, formerly Danielle Oberdier. She is the purveyor of DiKayo data and has been a very active member of our team now for several years. I was looking at the other day. We did a webinar, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, even like before the big COVID thing, I think we were doing some fun stuff. And time flies when you're having fun, right? But I wanted to ask Danielle today about her aspirations and her work in data because she's been working in even in data science years ago, Bayesian analytics, and all kinds of other things. So, Danielle of DiKayo Data, first of all, welcome to DM Radio. Welcome back to the show. And tell us, what do you see out there as a millennial who's close to the Gen Z folks? What gets you excited about data? Where are you looking to explore or to learn next? And what are you focused on?
Yes, thank you. This is so fun. I love when we do these little chats, just us. And
Yeah,
yes,
there you go.
it's been a really long time since 2019, I think, is when we started pairing up. And it's because you found me tweeting about data, and I'm from New Orleans as well. And you were like, there's someone doing data in New Orleans.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
kind of transitions into what you asked. I feel like New Orleans isn't a place that's known for big business presence, just it beats to its own drum. And coming from New York, that's definitely something I have adjusted to. So, what gets me excited about data these days really are the people who are willing to take up projects that are based on just open source data. You mentioned I'm flattered that you remembered that I like Bayes. There's a lot of healthcare studies out there that use open source data and statistics, which brings in like Bayesian models. And I feel like that's just such a great way for people to get used to using their skills, being self motivated. There's so many data spreadsheets out there that you can play with. And, the job market is hard. And so, you have to be able to show that you can manipulate data, that you have all the skills, and there's so much that you can do on your own that's exciting. That's exciting to be able to really get to a high level just from you and your computer. You don't necessarily need to have a big business backing you. That said, it's definitely helpful to have a really, really large database when you're trying out things like Tableau and Salesforce and, ArcGIS, all of these big, huge databases. I feel like you do need even SQL, it's kind of hard to do on your own, but there are sample databases that are large that you can still play with. So,
Yeah, and that's a really good point. You talked about how jobs are hard to find these days, and they are. I mean, truth be told, I think the entire paradigm of large organizations with many full employees is breaking and is probably going to remain broken. And so it behooves people who don't have a job to go out there and find some data. As you suggest, if you want to succeed in the data world, you got to cut your teeth somewhere. So find one of these sources and start playing around with it. Something that matters to you, like maybe it's population health, for example. Maybe it's crime. I know you worked with the New Orleans Police Department to look into some crime data. And I recall one of the things that I saw that really struck me was that when because you looked at there was some data, it wasn't a whole lot, so you couldn't draw too many conclusions. But what I drew the conclusion from was that when it was the one race and the same race of the
mm,
cop and the perpetrator, that's when worse things happened. Whereas when it was one race of the cop and another race of the perpetrator or the person encountered, let's say, we don't even know if it's a perpetrator, there seemed to be less. So I think the thing with data is you have to play around with it and keep an open mind. It's hard for us. I think a lot of times you want to look at data and look at to prove your point, but I think it's really incumbent upon us all as data practitioners to try not to do that, right? Because you want to go in and really look at the data, and let it shape your thought process more than you try to superimpose your thought process on the data. What do you think?
That's so smart. Yeah, I remember that study. The spreadsheet was from the open data portal that the city of New Orleans put together. And the person who created that open data portal actually is a sponsor of DataFem. So
Nice.
yeah, she's really cool. And that particular spreadsheet, I think it was called use of force. So that's what that was one of the more robust data sets that we had. And yeah, I was also kind of surprised to see that, because seeing that, the cop and the perpetrator being of the same race, like that was a huge, I don't remember exactly what the percentage was, but it was like I was doing these calculations and I did not manipulate that to be true at all. That just jumped
Right.
out as true. Like that was just something that kept coming up. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, from a business perspective, it's like you can always make statistics sound good, but like for example, like my latest experience, like I was doing an audit on their drip campaign from 2024, and it's like, okay, like 14.2% open rate or something. That's great. That's like, a pretty good. I mean, it's like an okay statistic, but then at the end of the day, there was only like 7 people out of 18,000 converted, you
Wow.
know? So it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how things can look passable, but then they don't actually measure success. Um,
Well, I think you hit a huge point right there, which is focus on conversions. I remember it's probably 10 years ago now I heard this term and it kind of shook me. I was like, oh no. And the term was vanity metric, right? You got to watch out for the vanity metrics. It's like, oh, look, my open rate is 43%. How you doing? What are the conversions? Actually, two. I mean, it's like and it's hard to know. This is the thing, and it's funny. I'll tell you a little side story. I think you might find this amusing, but I will talk to some people, let's say from Silicon Valley, and I'll mention radio or I'll mention TV because, of course, we have a TV show. And they're like, "Pfft," they laugh, they scoff at you like nobody watches TV anymore. Someone said to me the other day, like, "Oh, your TV, don't think anyone will be watching that." I thought to myself, and I even told him, I said, and this is a titan of the industry. I told him, look, everyone talks about the data you get from digital. Most of it is nonsense. Like most of the data that you see, like I'm just going to pick on someone here on YouTube views. When you pay money, all of a sudden you get all these views. You didn't get any views before that, but now you get all these views. And of course, some of them are real. Not all of them are real. And I've seen this in email marketing data. It's all over the map in terms of the click throughs. I'll see like 90% click through, and like there's no way that 90% of the people out of 10,000 recipients actually click through on this. That's nonsense data. It's difficult to get around. You have to really normalize for all that stuff. And I point out to people, yes, people still listen to the radio, people still watch TV. These are very real media for consuming content, and they are, I think, complementary too. But it's funny because people think that because it's digital, there's data and there is data, but you can't always trust that data, and you have to really work hard to normalize it to understand what it really means, right?
yes, normalizing the data, just like normalizing statistics, like
Hmm.
that's something that is kind of like people can get away with not doing, but it's it's very important to put everything on the same scale.
Right.
Um,
Right. Otherwise, you can't do comparisons. I mean, it's like, and this I think is an ongoing challenge in the analytics business is getting a baseline, monitoring it, knowing what it's all about, and being able to analyze in a meaningful way what it really means. Because vanity metrics, as the name suggests, don't really mean much. And you picked up on the key, which is conversions. How many people are converting? And you really have to dig into the data to find that stuff, right?
Yeah, you really have to dig into the data and not be, I guess, afraid of the results. If you're looking from a biased perspective, sometimes you see
Right.
things that aren't there. Um, and I feel like data visualizations are also a really great way to just put in perspective what is happening, because oftentimes like our brains see a bunch of numbers and we don't really internalize what they mean. But when you have a visualization, they're a good visualization, our brains naturally process it. And that's what I like to say about knowledge graphs too. Like they kind of predict how a human brain is going to react to certain information, and they plot it that way so that you're kind of seeing what you're thinking yourself mapped out on the screen, and that
Interesting.
mirroring effect is so important.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, you have to keep an open mind when you look at these things. And I think once you get past that hurdle, it's downright liberating because you can realize when you're wrong about stuff. You can have your theory about something, but when you look at the data, and that's the whole point of this industry is to focus on the data, understand what the data is telling you, and be able to gauge that. Like one of the tricks that I use and with our email marketing platform is again, I'll see, and it's like the last almost a year, I think, the numbers for clicks have been just bonkers, just absolutely positively not correct. And what's interesting is certain systems will be fooled by that. So LinkedIn was once fooled by this crazy number because I got this huge spike in views on a LinkedIn post that you would not get from a LinkedIn article. So this is interesting because it goes to show you that how they're actually capturing traffic data in one part of LinkedIn is different than how they're capturing it in another part, which wouldn't seem to make sense, but you know probably from experience that this happens all the time. There are different build outs, different components in these platforms that do things differently. So what would get fooled in a post that would not get fooled in an article. I was like, well, that's interesting. But in looking in that, you will learn about the systems, right? Because it's like, how would you learn about LinkedIn's system? I mean, you can study Kafka, which of course is the engine that runs LinkedIn, which they open sourced, and now Confluence sits on top of Kafka. But you really get into the weeds. Really, a lot of it is just behavioral. It's just looking at what happens and thinking about it, right? You have to sit there and think about stuff, and then you'll at least get on the right path and learn something new, and then register that and notice it until it changes again, right? So my point is that it's a whole learning process that will never end because these systems are always changing, right?
Yeah, you have to be willing to always be learning. Like there's never going to be a time where what you know is going to be stable enough. I think as a journalist background, that's so important to me because I do always like to be learning something new. But it's also really difficult in the job market because, your skills might not be like if you just zero in on one language, become the expert, you never know if that's gonna be the in thing in the next year or 2, and then you spend all your time learning
Mhm.
that.
Right. That's right. Well, and learn how to learn. For a short period of time, I was teaching at a school in New Orleans, and I remember I told the headmaster lady, who's a very, very nice lady. It's right there on Canal Street, in fact. And I told her, look, for information systems, for computer systems, what I'm going to teach them is to learn how to learn an app. Because once they get into the real world, there'll be all these other apps that they have to then learn. So it's not so important to learn just how to use this one particular app in school. What's important is learning how to learn apps and learning how to kind of move around and ask questions and do all that kind of fun stuff. That I think is, and she smiled. She's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, this guy gets it." Right? So you have to learn how to learn, and you even have to learn how to unlearn some stuff. We were just talking about that on Inside Analysis because the old ways of doing things, you don't have to do things the old ways anymore. There are all these new ways, so it's also important to unlearn certain things, right? What do you think?
I think that's a big thing. I think unlearning I'm trying to think of certain things that we would need to unlearn to move forward. I mean, there's definitely I still am a big fan of Excel, but I think that if you want to apply Excel to other platforms, there's definitely things that you have to admit about Excel's weaknesses, like what can it not do? What can Python do to fill in the gaps? How do we make Excel's current features fit in a more modern environment? What isn't compatible, you know?
Hmm.
I think, like, it can come down to how simple it is that a CSV is preferable to an XLSX, like, you
Right.
know?
Or
Um,
just or zip codes, right? Have they even fixed the zip code thing with the zip code that begins with 0? Like,
oh, right.
you
Yeah,
have to
that
put it in
was
quotations, right? Isn't that the
mhm.
trick that they do is put it in quotations? I mean, that's a pretty basic thing for a long time now. But you have to know the limitations of the technology that you're using, right?
It also just takes time, and time is not something like, we think we're all stressed about money, but time is even more stressful, like, do we have the time to just sit and play around? That's why, like, I love school and academic environments, I think, because if you really like something, you can spend all that time just learning it, and in a corporate or business environment, you don't really have that time because
Hmm.
results are already on the table, like, results are already what you need, and so you kind of have to cut out that explorative, you know, element to learning a new platform, and that's hard because I think spending time with the platform and being really, really thirsty for knowledge about how it works is what makes you an expert at the end of the day.
That's a really, really good point is focusing on what gets you excited and like in the morning, in the daytime, what do you enjoy doing? What do you do in your job where time just flies by as opposed to what do you dread doing? And for me, it's paperwork, like anything that's paperwork oriented. I'm like, oh, just please get me away from the paperwork. I can't stand it. But we're getting there. I mean, I'll just throw one little teaser, and we'll pick this up after the first break here. But I mentioned on our last show that I just recorded moments ago with a gentleman from the DC area, FedStack. They train folks to work for the big SIs in DC, and I mentioned to him what I saw in Amsterdam at the OutSystems event, which is a low-code, no-code platform. Their Copilot is called Mentor, and you can take a requirements document, just a text document, load it into Mentor, and it will build the app for you. It'll just build the app from the requirements document. And the one that they did in the show, it even found a missing outcome. So there were like 5 different outcomes that were presented in the requirements document. They forgot one, and it thought of it and included it, which was like a no-go if the thing just didn't work. So you're talking about taking text, loading it into a platform, a low-code platform, and having to actually generate the app, which you then can then fine-tune and tweak and so forth. I'm like, that is a massive game changer. You just fundamentally changed how apps get designed and delivered. Well, folks, don't touch that. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back on DM Radio with our star millennial, Danielle Oberdier LeBlanc of DiKayo Data. 6 years ago, we started working together because I found someone in New Orleans working in data. I'm like, yes, New Orleans as a data aficionado. Yes. And they're
That was on a higher plane when that happened. That was like magic.
it was pretty funny. There's actually a guy from either Tabular or one of the iceberg projects that's from New Orleans too. So I was very encouraged to see that. So we're getting there, man. New Orleans is getting there. And if you could work from anywhere, why not work from New
Why
Orleans,
not
right?
work from there? It's so amazing. I'm really excited to go back to my co-working space. I've been there on and off since 2017, and it's in the
Wow,
Bywater, which is
nice.
kind of a
I love the
interesting.
Bywater.
You
I
do?
love.
Oh my God.
I lived there. That was we had our apartment was in the Bywater.
I'm so jealous.
Oh, it's so interesting. For those who visit New Orleans, don't just stay in the French Quarter. Yes, the French Quarter is great. The Faubourg Marigny is one of my favorite places in the world. And the
Yes.
Bywater, it's just this interesting little enclave that's out on the eastern side. You're not really supposed to say east west in New Orleans because it doesn't work that way. It's
It
really
hurts
lakeside, riverside,
presently.
uptown,
Yeah.
downtown. Like if you say east, we're like, you are not from here if you're talking about east. But it is on the eastern side and it's right up on the river, and it's just this interesting little antiquated culture, and it's just fascinating. There's a cool barbecue place down there, and some cool bars. Vaughn's
The
is down
joint.
there, right?
You're
Oh,
talking about the joint.
the joint, yes, the joint. That's what it's called. They have awesome barbecue and old houses. I mean, goodness gracious, if you can work from anywhere, why not work from New Orleans, even in the data space, right?
Yes, I think that I've always thought that it's such a fun place to live, and Like a lot of my classmates after MBA moved back to New York or to Houston, but I feel like there's something really special here. It's fun to network, it's fun to, see what the culture's like. I've worn so many different hats while I'm here. It's just really
Nice.
it's a great place to be. And yeah, that co-working space is called The Warehouse and
Nice.
right past the train tracks in the Bywater.
Okay. I know exactly where that is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the nice part about New Orleans is, like, you can walk from the French Quarter through the Marigny to the Bywater, and it's such a nice walk, and you just get just so much energy from seeing everything that's happening.
Well, and and you reminded me of something here. What is really powerful about all of that is inspiration and creativity. Because I think a lot of folks, maybe who don't know a lot about the data space, might think, oh, it sounds terribly dry and boring. And certainly there are some things that can be boring. Loading files, doing ETL, ELT work, all that sort of traditional bread and butter, if you will, of the day-to-day workflow around data. Some of it is boring, but what you're really trying to do is find opportunities, the whole point is to find insights and to understand what's happening. And to do that effectively, you need good perspective. And creativity is great for perspective because it allows you to view things through different lenses and understand things in different ways. Things like information architecture, for example, things like observability that have been blowing up the world of data these days. All that stuff is really good grist for the mill, right?
Yes, and, we've had this conversation before that, what gets me really excited is creating content about data. I do really love playing around in R and playing around with Python and learning Salesforce and, like, really getting deep into the data myself because I do have a lot of, math love, and I'm very inclined towards that. But I think what really gets me excited is the content that both of us can create about data, about information technology, and, about AI. I think, like, that's what really moves me, and so that's where I like to sit, even though it's really cool to just be the data engineer or just be, deep in the data, but then you're kind of like, you kind of work with a few packages that you keep working with, like,
Right.
you just keep using those, and then it becomes more of, like, just an automated process in your head than an actual exploration, and so for me, like, I don't have to I can basically say, like, "Oh, there's this cool new feature." Well, it might be irrelevant to people right now in terms of, like, work like, putting it to work, but talking about it, people are thirsty for content and free content because
Right.
literally everywhere I go has a paywall. It'll be this juicy headline that I really want to read, even though I know it'll probably make me angry. And I can't, but that's part of the allure, right? Like you see this thing and you're like, this might be getting off topic a little bit, but there was this article in the New Yorker that got posted called The Case Against Travel, and
Hmm.
you know that travel is, like, everything that I stay alive for. I read it, I was infuriated, but I had to go through a few hoops and ended up on Reddit to actually read the whole article.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because there's another your husband, in fact, got me connected with Citizen Free Press, and so that's now
Oh,
my new
no.
Bible, and I check it out. And what this guy does, I think it's very clever. He uses the Internet Archive. So for stories that go from publications with paywalls, he just goes to the Internet Archive and links there, which I think is fascinating because he's circumventing these walls. It's very interesting. And again, in the media business, a lot of media companies have had great difficulty, and that continues. It continues, and it's a really strange situation, but it's like I've seen this myself in our industry, and I've learned, and granted, we are a niche, right? I mean, we are in the media business around data and AI and all these fun technologies, But, in the old days, you would buy an advertisement in a newspaper because the content was in the paper and the ad was next to it. So you'd hope that someone looked at your ad in the newspaper. In our business these days, your content is your advertising. I mean, that's the funny thing. It's content, but it's how you demonstrate to potential sponsors what you know and what you can do. And so, I mean, how bizarre that it used to be advertising is over here, content's over there. We don't do infomercials. This is not an infomercial. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with infomercials if they're providing good information about some product. But the point is now the content is the advertising. It's like, well, what the hell happened there? The point is things are changing, but to your point, people still want to understand. They still want to learn, and they want free content, and they want new perspectives on things. So yeah, that's like the mission of this show, DM Radio, from way, way back when. I used to open every show saying the show where we peel away the layers of marketing veneer and get down to brass tacks to figure out what is really happening out there. And that's what you have to do to get people to pay attention is you have to provide that gritty, granular nut that is worth spending the time to absorb, right?
Yes, and it's, like, down to the little details too, it's always helpful for me to listen to you interview people
Mm.
because and I know it's always funny when I'm, like, live tweeting your stuff and most of the quotes come from you, and you're like, "Quote
That's
the
pretty funny.
sponsor."
That's okay. I appreciate it. Well, I mean, you're a master live tweeter because you get into this stuff and you listen and you find those clever, juicy little bits. And that's what dialogue is all about. That's why I love the real banter back and forth on these topics because when you do that, especially if it's in a live event, people will articulate things in ways they had never articulated them before. That's called getting off the script, right?
Yeah, and it's really cool to hear people just discover something that they might have been thinking but couldn't put into words before, and then they go,
Right.
"Aha," and they say
Right.
something really great.
Right. Right. That's it. That's the
You
fun
get them
part
to
because
that
it's like
point.
you tease it out of them and then there it is. Because one of the things I've noticed in communication, this is very, very important. You have to remember other people don't necessarily know what you're trying to say. And that's one really positive side of
Right.
synchronous, live, visual communication where I can see you as I'm talking and I can tell if you're getting it or if you're not. If your eyes start to glaze over, it's like, all right, we got to back up. Let's try to position this a different way and know that of course people can disagree with you, but it is important to know that people are really hearing what you're saying and understanding what you're saying. That's like half the battle in business, which means it's half the battle in all this data stuff too, right?
Yeah. Um, it's interesting to kind of, yeah, keep people's attention because people's attention spans, including mine sometimes, are
Right.
just so short.
It's
I think
bad.
that's what's really cool about you doing the inside scoop as well, like those and I now that I've been doing them too, I'm just like, "How does he just perfectly get it down to a minute?" And what I've been doing is
It's hard.
actually your 2 noises, the "ding," I've just
Uh-huh.
putting them as pillars on either side and just editing in between, and I'm like,
There
"Okay,
you go.
for the pillar, bye."
Yeah.
And then I
That's
just,
it.
like, edit out a few ums, keep it
Yeah.
keep it down, you know?
Right. Right.
But,
That's a
a
good point.
minute
That's
is
the way to
kind
do
of
it.
as long as people's uh, like, attention lasts, but then at the same time, long form journalism is still so much more successful than short paragraphs, so, like and then for me personally, the podcasts I listen to, it's kind of timed with when I'm walking or when I'm doing something
Ah,
like
interesting.
so, like, I don't want it to be 4 minutes long all the time because then I have to keep switching up, like, it's nice if it kinda goes for a while because then
Interesting.
I'm, like, invested in the story and it gets me on my run to Barnes& and Noble and back in the shopping center. So
That's
I think
funny.
I think, like, it's interesting because, like, our attention spans are short, but then there's also so much need for long form content still that's still attractive, and, yeah, I think, like, what I wanna talk about more too is, like, those media paywalls that we were talking about and, like, how that feels to, like, click on an article and be so curious and then have to kinda, like, squint over the little paywall screen line, which takes out the fun of the experience. I mean, trust me, I get it. I get why people are
Right.
charging. I charge, but it's like charge in a way that doesn't impact the fun of consuming your content, I guess.
Right. Right. I mean, this is, I'm telling you, this is a major, major issue in media these days. And also, of course, in the data world is how do you make money at doing these things? You know, how do you make money? It's hard to do. How do you collect money? If someone can get it for free, why would they want to pay someone? I mean, look at universities for goodness sakes. You know, look at the fact that you can learn, like through Coursera, you can learn all kinds of great stuff. It's like, well, why do we have these big universities anymore? And I'm not saying that there isn't a need for them. There is. Certainly, there's the whole experience and just having a teacher who can understand where you are as a student and help you move through material quickly, that is invaluable. And I think it always will be. And I don't think AI is ever going to replace that. But AI as a co-pilot in general is so powerful. It's really kind of crazy. Although I will admit, I'm annoyed every time I go into some place and the little device, little icon is there. Help me write. I don't need your help writing my emails. Okay, like don't like this. I know what I want to say.
I know
Uh,
exactly what you mean. Yeah.
It's so annoying. It's like I get it. You can do that stuff now, and I'm a little bit worried that we are going to have this sort of de facto cookie cutter approach now to content and to how you communicate with people. And, you know, it's like they give you the three answers at the bottom when you're like, thanks, okay, great, or whatever. It's like, no, I can type thanks. You know, I don't need the
Yeah,
machine to type that for me.
I know. Well, you read my juicy LinkedIn post. I mean, I think like a lot of employers are like they either hate AI or they love it. And if they love
Interesting.
it, it's like you turn in something that's unique, that's yours, and they're like, that doesn't sound like AI. And it's like, well, yeah,
It's
you
not.
can't, it, AI is exciting. So I think people feel like that's something that, oh, this is the new normal. But the problem is AI doesn't have emotions in the way that we do. Like you can feel the emotion and
Wow.
behind content. And the thing is, like with you, like you might not be talking about like emotions themselves. Like you're not writing like, the next Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel when you're talking about information technology, but like the emotion there is excitement, like real love for your field. And like that's the
Right.
thing about teachers is that like when you get a professor or a teacher that really loves their topic and loves their subject, that's contagious, or it can be, to the right students. And you find you just like that can't be replaced by AI.
Right.
And so I think like for me, the best content out there, even marketing content, should have some emotion backing it, whether it's like excitement for the future, vision, like being a visionary. Like these are like emotions that like lift you up. You can feel them, you can
That's
feel
awesome.
the excitement about AI. Like one of the guys I interviewed for DataFem, he was always talking about like how early stages of AI, you couldn't even sleep. It was so exciting.
Wow. That's an excellent point, by the way. We've got to go to a commercial break here, but we'll pick up on that after the break. I think you made an awesome point, which is that good content needs emotion. It needs emotion that drove the content that created it. But we'll be right back, folks. You're
Pick
listening
it
to
up.
DM Radio. All
Cool.
right, folks, back here on DM Radio, having a blast with Danielle LeBlanc, formerly Danielle Oberdier, in New Orleans. I love New Orleans. It was snowing in New Orleans.
Crazy.
It's a rare thing to have, but it's happened before. It's 1895, I guess, was the record of snowfall, like 8.5 inches or something like that. But you had like inches and inches. You have more snow than we have, and we have like a lot of snow
Yes.
up here these days. So
And the
that's
West Coast,
th-
Washington, like, is so cold but doesn't have snow right now. It all
oh,
came to us. We
can
got a
I
turn
tell
with
you?
it.
I don't like the cold. I like brr. When they told me about global warming, I was like, that sounds good. When's it gonna happen?
But you didn't realize, I know, you didn't realize that global warming means the cold goes just somewhere else.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the point, right? It moves around. It's still cold. But polar vortexes, no, thank you. I don't want any polar vortexes. Anything I can do. AI data centers, they warm things up around here. I'm not a big
I
fan
could
of
totally
being
see you
cold.
in, like, an island environment.
Yes, we went down to Jamaica, man. Yaman. I was
Oh, that's so you.
I spoke at the first ever that I know of analytics conference in Jamaica. This was, gosh, it's got to be 8 years ago now because I think the kid was like 3, and she loved it. Oh my God, it was at the I think it's Half Moon Resort is what it was called, and I mean literally, we had bungalows on the freaking waterfront, so you could walk out your little place and go like 14 feet, and you're on the beach and for some reason, I guess just because of how, it's in the Caribbean there, you don't get a lot of like tides. It doesn't come in and go out. It's all usually kind of the same. There's not a whole lot of change. So it wasn't dangerous or threatening or anything. And it was just gorgeous. I could stay there forever in a day and just relax and listen to the just water just softly coming on the shore and cute little creatures moving around. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yay. That's inspiration, boy. If you want to build an enterprise data warehouse, go to Jamaica first and just like kind of absorb the world around you and get peace and calmness, right? Well, I'm reminded of my friend, my developer friend, Everin, who is just brilliant, and he has a great mantra that I'll throw over to you just to get your thoughts on in the data world as a data practitioner. He said, "Busy is the enemy of creative." What do you think about that?
I don't know. I think that if you're not busy enough, it can also be stifling.
That's
Um,
true.
I think that, like, having a busy, fast-paced life kinda gets your brain going in a way that, like, you know, keeps
Yeah,
creative ideas coming, and you just have to be diligent enough to document them, I guess.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. Well, so I'm a big fan of cliches, and I mean, I love cliches, proverbs in particular. And there's one that says, if you want something done, give it to the busiest person in the office, right? Like instead of finding a person who's not got much going on, no, give it to the busiest person because they're the ones who are going to get it
They'll
done.
just add it as another task and then get it
And then
done,
boom,
like,
boom,
they'll
boom.
just insert it into their flow. I
Right.
feel that. I feel that. Yeah, what one thing about what we were talking about before the break, I think, like, emotions is a very, like, scary word in business, and so, like, I'm not talking about, like, emotional when you think of, like, emotions and TV dramas, like, I'm not talking about that.
Right.
Emotions can also be just excited for your career, excited over developments, hope for the future, hope for AI. Those are things that need to be expressed that, like, can't really be expressed by AI, but AI can give you a good starting point, like, when we both hate writing contracts and proposals and things, AI can write those for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, use it where you need it, and it's great for ideas. That's what I've found. It's great
Mm,
for triggering thoughts and getting. I'll say, give me a list of cliches about working, and brrr, you get a whole bunch of cliches, and like, oh yeah, I remember this one, I remember that one. So it's good to sort of jog your creative process. But the point is, don't just rely on it to crank out all your content because that's going to feel generic, look generic, just have a sort of tinny nature to it, and you want it to have life. And that's what I
like
loved about
yeah.
your concept is like life has emotion, life has energy, and words can reflect that energy, right?
I agree with you, that's a beautiful thing to say, and I think also, like, AI having that at your disposal kind of makes it less lonely to create content. I mean, I love content creation, I have since I was born creating content pretty much. Honestly, I was.
Nice,
My
nice.
mom was getting her doctorate in piano, and I learned piano, like, when I was 2, and I just started
Wow.
writing stuff, and, then I started writing words, and I'm just always been creating stuff, and I feel like it's nice to have that AI to kind of bounce back with, like, "Hey, that was great, but can you make it more this? Can you make it more this?" That's a conversation that I've had with myself when I'm creating, but it's nice to have that kind of external, um, entity there
Yeah, that's
to
right.
communicate with.
That's a very good way to put it. And it is, I mean, honest to goodness, it is so good, these AI engines, these large language models, at reflecting back the patterns that they've seen. And so you can ask it all kind of questions. I mean, you can sit there and I think this is going to revolutionize news as well, is that you can just sit there and have a conversation with your digital reporter is kind of what it is, and just ask it questions. It'll throw you answers. Now, again, the veracity we have to watch out for, but as long as you're delving into, and there's that AI word, right? Loves delve. They say if you use
Oh,
the word delve, it's AI. I use the word delve. Okay, I can still use the word delve even if AI uses it all the time. But
funny that there's not a company called Delve AI. There might be.
yeah,
Sorry
oh,
if there is.
that's right. We haven't heard of you yet, but reach out to us. We'll get you on the show.
Yeah.
But but to delve into something, as long as it's been widely published about, you're pretty safe. Because I remind people, these large language models are consensus engines. That's what they're doing, is they're giving you the average of what they've seen based upon training and your prompt. So as long as it's kind of in the middle of the road, as long as it's a widely published topic, they're going to be very accurate. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of, not to get all woo-woo as I say, but it's like a collective consciousness that we're building.
Yeah,
And that's
right,
something that's like an ancient, like a very ancient concept. And,
right.
we're going back into that. We're not necessarily creating something new. It's kind of like completing a circle. So this
Wow.
chat GPT is internalizing our individual inputs and making a collective consciousness, because like we're like using it for all sorts of things, but some people, they're just using it for fun, like they're using it just to like get recipes or get like I'm
Right,
trying to think what I've heard other people use it for, like even just like relationship advice.
right.
Or
Sure.
like, you know um
It'll
like,
throw out all kinds of interesting stuff, and that's what's wild. And I'll tell you, maybe we'll pick this up in the podcast bonus segment, but I'll tell you the aha moment I had when researching large language models and how they have been designed and how you actually build and train them is when I realized that they're not when you train a large language model on text, for example, it's not persisting the text like we consider in an old database fashion where it's word for word, a text string inside of a cell, for example. That's very deterministic, and there's going to be a need for that forever in the information systems world. That's not what they do. What they do is it affects the weights and biases in parameters, and there are millions, sometimes billions of parameters. So that's when I was like, oh, wow. That's very interesting. And syntax I was told was actually easy. One of the guys I talked to said the syntax we've actually had for quite a while now, how sentences are structured, how paragraphs are structured, when to use a period, when to use a comma. I mean, these are rules that an engine can sort of ascertain and understand, if you will, in a certain, I'll put that in quotes, I suppose. But the syntax, I was kind of surprised to hear that it was kind of a problem solved for a while now. But in terms of the rest, amazingly, these things are still just predicting the next letter or the next word based upon their training and your prompt. And yet somehow they come up with these syntactically correct, semantically accurate most of the time, prosaic answers on things. You're just like, wow. But it's again, it's the patterns of the words that they're reflecting back. So it's like we are witnessing when you play with one of these things, you are seeing a reflection of this compendium of knowledge and content that is all over the interwebs. That is like it's a reflection of everything that almost everyone has learned or at least published online is reflected in these engines. And that to me is just like, hold on a second, hold like wait a minute. What? How is this even possible? And what we'll see over time, I think, is more and more effort put into the grounding, whether that's your vector databases or possibly your fine tuning if you're a bit more advanced in your understanding of these technologies, you can do some fine tuning of the models. But wowzers, man, like this is going to be wild. And again, once after we go to the final podcast bonus segment, I'll tell you about one of the other companies that I've come across, which is very interesting. But folks, if you're in if you're looking for a job, focus on data, focus on AI. If you like that stuff, you can research it all the do day. You can sit there all day long and ask questions of these machines, and they will give you interesting answers. But don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio. Time for the podcast bonus segment here with Danielle LeBlanc of DiKayo Data. And I interviewed this guy from safebooks.ai. And what they do is they are sort of an accounting technology that you use to get a handle on your numbers, on your data, and they help you determine if something is wrong. Because there was a story of Macy's where this massive amount of money was hidden on the expense side, and it didn't come out until they did their quarterly earnings reports, and it was a total mess because there was a lot of money that just had not been reported. Well, with SafeBooks, they would have found that for you. And you know what they do that I found fascinating is they will go, I think it's to Hugging Face, and just take one of these models off the shelf, and there are just tons and tons of models you can use. Take it off the shelf. They create a bespoke model for every single client. So basically, they go and they'll take your financial data and they start training your own model on your data. And then after a period of time, it gets good enough where it really knows the patterns of your data. And if something weird happens, it'll send you an alert like, ding, is this right? Is there a $10,000 expense to Bloor Group? I'm like, oh, I don't remember that. Let's look into that one. And the point is, they're going to be telling you what to focus on. So it's not that they'll get the answers right all the time, but it's that they will give you 10 things to look at, five of which are probably going to be really important. I mean, what do you think about that? I think it's amazing.
I think it's amazing also. I think that it's really cool that you can have some technology come in and work with what you already have,
Right.
because it's not about you adjusting to that technology system, it's about that technology coming in and adjusting to your system so that the work
Right.
that you've put in already is just fine-tuned
Right.
and optimized. We love that word optimization. Like, oftentimes we're doing stuff that's really great, we're putting in our best effort, but that doesn't mean that we're, like, doing the most efficient things possible? And so if that technology can come in and kind of fill in the gaps, fill in what's missing and just streamline it around a little bit, then our work doesn't have to go to waste. It just gets enhanced by the technology.
Wow,
Take
that's a very
AI.
interesting point. Our work doesn't go to waste, it just gets enhanced. And I think we are going to see going forward companies embrace their own models. Get your own model, train it on your data. Now, of course, you need to have enough compute power to do that. You always want to make sure there's business benefit from these things. But I have to believe that, companies of a significant size and stature really should look into getting their own model. Maybe it's a small language model, for example, and just start throwing your data at it and see what it can do. Who was it? A guy from Boom, he was on the show last year, I think it was, or even the year before, who had this great comment about machine learning and what's the most important thing to understand. He said, learning. And he meant humans learning. Like we have to learn what these freaking things are and how they work because we don't know yet what they can do. And from what the stories that I've heard, these models can learn crazy things that you did not expect them to learn and then reflect that back. And I mean, it's a game changer, right?
Yeah, because they can see, like, what you're going for. Like, when I'm on a roll with things, I have a system and I'm doing it this way. I'm doing it my way, and but it's still organized to some extent, like, it's still a system, and if AI can come in and appreciate that and, make it just more consistent or make it, just make it more streamlined in a way, that's important, but I wouldn't want like, ideally, I would want my system to still hold some weight, and so
Right.
that's what I like
Right.
about a technology coming in and filling in the gaps rather than me saying, "Okay, I have to make my system work for said platform."
Yeah, that's an excellent point that you just made, and I think it's something we should focus on and try to evangelize a bit because you're right. Like typically when people think about information systems applications like Salesforce, for example, okay, I have to go learn Salesforce now. I have to learn this tool, that tool. Not many people really enjoy that. Usually you want to just kind of learn. It's like learning to play the piano or learning to play guitar. Like the early part is hard. It's difficult to get over that hump until you start humming and really sort of understand and get in a groove about things. But that's the cool thing about some of these models, that if they're designed properly, of course, and leveraged, is that they can absorb what's already there and work with you so you don't have to change everything. You're just fine tuning over time. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the fine tuning over time can happen in the background,
Right.
when you're not even aware of it. It's something that AI can discover on its own. And we had our click webinars over the summer and talking about bad actors and identifying what patterns might be abnormal, and what that means. Like, could this be a bad actor, or is it just an anomaly from us internally? And AI can recognize those patterns quicker than we can.
Yeah. I mean, that's an excellent point. I think that's a good closing point. AI can recognize patterns more quickly than we can, at least fairly often. And I think it's gonna be an amazing period of time now where we listen to the AI and, correct it where it's wrong. It's not always gonna get things right, but depending on the model, they can learn that. And you can have this reinforcement learning that gets better and better at being able to identify things. And I think that's really where a lot of the value is going to manifest is in suggestions, because the AI is going to come and say, hey, have you done this, done this, done that? Reached out to the Google Mail was doing that, Gmail was doing that. Oh, you haven't responded to this person, maybe you should. Sometimes it's really good. It's like,
It's
oh, that's right.
helpful.
That was a hot prospect. I should not have let that one drop.
That's really helpful, but I think what's really giving me a lot of hope right now is that, AI is really wonderful and we both appreciate it, but we're both content creators who prefer to like write our own emails and write our own scripts and write our own abstracts,
Right.
and
Right.
like that extra effort is gonna be something people don't know how to do soon, and
Yeah.
we're not gonna
Wow.
use that. We're not gonna lose that because we actually like writing our own stuff.
Right. That's right. Well, that's a great way to end the show. Look this lady up online, Danielle LeBlanc, DiKayo Data, DIKAYO Data. You'll be seeing her on our webinars and in the Twitterverse soon. And send me an email if you want to be in the show, info@dmradio.biz. You've been listening to DM Radio.